Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well and are staying safe out there right now. And in today's video, I'm going to be giving you my recap and thoughts on episode 5 of Mystic Pop-Up Bar, airing weekly on Netflix. In the Wednesday episode, which as I'm filming it is today, we don't have a lot of new discoveries in my opinion, and it's mainly about the customer that they're helping in the episode. But we do have some hints or some suggested romances that might be occurring later on in the series. And honestly, there is a twist in regards to the customer that I didn't see coming. Why I didn't see it coming, I don't know. But yeah, it definitely surprised me in a good yet sad way. And with that very vague description, why don't we go ahead and get into the episode so you know what I'm talking about. We start off with Kang-bae and Woo-ju at Kang-bae's apartment, where she is making some porridge for him to eat before he takes his medicine so that he can get better. If you remember, at the end of episode 4, Kang-bae suddenly got very sick. We aren't sure what exactly caused it. It's either him being overworked because now he's working 2 jobs, or the fact that he traveled through the afterlife realm. We really don't know, but either way, Woo-ju is nursing him back to health. As Kang-bae looks at the porridge she's made for him, he tells her how touched he is by the gesture, since no one has ever cooked for him at his own home before. Because, you know, last episode we found out that he was an orphan. Woo-ju tries to blow this off by pretty much saying she only did it because she needs him better so he can get back to work. So less talking and more eating. While he's eating, she asks what his favorite food is, and he says dumplings, and he gives his reason why, which is that it's filled with meat and veggies, and all you have to do is steam them to cook them. Woo-ju explains there's a little more than just steaming them to make dumplings. They're a little more complicated, but Kang-bae didn't actually know this because he's only ever had frozen ones. Which that's kind of really sad too. Poor Kang-bae. And it's interesting that he says dumplings because these end up having a fairly important role in this episode. It's interesting that the conversation starts with dumplings and ends with dumplings. And you'll know what I mean in a minute. The next day we see Kang-bae at work and his 2 co-workers are telling them he has to compete in a store competition happening because he's the youngest and physically able. They both give their excuses as to why they can't do it themselves, and they don't really give Kang-bae much of a choice. The grand prize is 2 million won to spend on a team dinner, and they remind him that this will make up for all the events he has avoided up until this point. During the orientation for the competition, we find out it's a dance competition, and that apparently how they do will also affect their yearly review or their job reviews, which if you're a contract worker, I imagine that's pretty important. So not only is he forced to do this and he's gonna have to touch somebody, but if he doesn't do it, his job performance is going to be affected as well. We see at this moment that Yu-rin is also participating and is a little worried about the dancing aspect of the competition and is starting to regret signing up. When she notices that Kang-bae is competing and also seems to be interested in her being there as well, she just tries to ignore him. Meanwhile, after seeing Kang-bae sick, Woo-ju decides she needs to work on her fitness and manager Gui joins her, whether he really wants to or not. After exhausting themselves with speed walking, they end up getting a 2-seater bike to ride since their limbs were tired, and it winds up looking a little like a date between the 2 of them since they also stop for a snack where Woo-ju decides that manager Gui's snack looks better than hers and convinces him with her cute feminine wiles to trade snacks. This is also when Death appears, and before asking for their help with the spirit, he asks if they're on a date, which Woo-ju says that's disgusting, and manager Gui quickly tries to change the subject as to why Death is visiting, which we find out apparently Death has a spirit who ran off when they were supposed to be going to the afterlife because they have unfinished business, and he needs help tracking the spirit down. At first, Woo-ju is like, heck no, I'm busy enough trying to make my quota, but then Death mentions that this will count in her quota since she can use her gifts to send the spirit into the family member's dream so that they can say goodbye, which that's why the spirit isn't ready to go to the afterlife. It's because they suddenly died and couldn't say goodbye. With this, Woo-ju says she and Gui are in. We're then introduced to the customer who is visiting the grave of his mother with his wife. I guess it's more a crematorium, but I'm going to call it a grave. After the visit, he gives his keys to his wife, who is going to visit her sister, and says he'll take a taxi to work since it's not too far. Later that night, we see the customer go on the bus, and Gui is on there as well, following him in hopes to find out where the spirit has been hanging out. He follows him into a convenience store where we see the customer get some beer, and the cashier at the store seems to know him and says something along the lines of "poor thing" as he leaves the store. Obviously, the customer doesn't hear this. She's sort of saying it under her breath, but we do hear that. And Gui hears it as well and asks the cashier about the customer. And this is when we find out that he used to work late at night, but recently he's been coming home early pretty much since the funeral. We find this out a little later in the episode when he goes to report his findings to the rest of the gang. Meanwhile, at the Mystic Pop-Up Bar, we see Woo-ju making dumplings from scratch. After the conversation, we assume they're because they're Kong-bae's favorite, and when he comes in, she tries to play it off that she didn't make them just for him. But that was because she wanted some as well, thinking that he'd be super excited. But he's not, since he's got other things on his mind, and tells her about the dance competition at his work and how he's worried his coworkers will find out about his powers because he's having to do this. When Woo-ju asks why he joined, he mentions how he didn't really have a choice since he's the youngest and fittest, and he then brings up that maybe that's why Yu-rin was competing as well. When Woo-ju hears this and remembers that Yu-rin isn't affected by Kong-bae's powers, she tells him to have her be his partner since he'll be safe touching her. After the solution has been found, Kong-bae asks why the pop-up bar is at an apartment complex, and it's explained that this is where the spirit used to live and how they're trying to find the spirit through its family members. This is when the customer sees the pop-up bar and that they are serving dumplings, which we find out are his favorite food as well, and that his wife makes them often for him. So it seems that maybe Woo-ju knew this and that's why she was also making dumplings, or it just kind of happened that way. But anyway, she asks Kong-bae to touch the man to see if they can get any sort of intel on the spirit, since he's obviously a family member. We know that now. But when he goes to touch him, nothing happens. It doesn't seem to be the same issue he has with Yu-rin, but his powers just don't seem to work on this guy. He brings up later that he wishes he could see ghosts as well so he could help further, and Manager Gui says if he could do that and get people to tell them their worries from just touching them, he would be making bank as a shaman. Woo-ju scoffs at this and tells them that being a shaman isn't all it's cracked up to be. I mean, most of the time people are cursing at you or coming at you with knives, that sort of stuff. And Kong-bae is curious how Woo-ju knows this. And Woo-ju deflects, saying, well, she's been around for 500 years. She's seen everything. That's how she knows. Obviously, it's not because her mother was a shaman or anything. So she doesn't want Kong-bae to know about her past. Interesting note. After the customer leaves the bar, they decide they need to check his home and see if the spirit is there. So Manager Gui goes in disguise as maintenance and checks the house for the spirit, but doesn't find them. We do end up seeing a dark figure appear outside the apartment window looking in on the customer. And it could be that the spirit was avoiding Gui. We don't really know, but it's not really in the apartment at that point in time. It's outside, but it's obviously present. So the next day we see Woo-ju and Manager Gui follow the customer to work, since Manager Gui decides if it's not at the apartment, it has to be following the family member. It'll show up eventually. We need to keep following them. So we see Woo-ju and Manager Gui follow the customer to work. They're on the bus, which is a little rickety-rockety, and Gui ends up catching and holding Woo-ju in his arms after a pretty big bump. The way he holds her and the way Woo-ju looks up at him seems like she may be having some more friendly feelings towards Gui, but this passes quickly since, of course, Gui's kind of like focus on the mission and be more careful, you're gonna give us away. At the next stop, where the customer is supposed to get off, we see that he's just resting his eyes and doesn't get off. Gui and Woo-ju do find this odd, but they get distracted when Gui sees a spirit get on the bus inhabiting a human body. Thinking it's the spirit they're looking for, Gui tells Woo-ju not to make any sudden movements or spook the spirit, and he starts to devise a plan as to how to grab them. It seems it's too late and the spirit was onto them because it quickly stops the bus and gets off. Manager Gui and Woo-ju chase after him, and after a pretty epic chase scene, Gui catches up to the spirit where it's discovered that it's not the spirit they're looking for, but it is an evil spirit, and he takes it down. So after that, the new plan is Woo-ju is going to go to the customer's office while Gui takes the evil spirit to the afterlife to be processed. While at the office, we see the customer come in late saying he hadn't ridden the bus in a while and missed his stop, which to me didn't seem like a valid excuse since we saw him riding the bus the evening before. But before we can kind of process this, Woo-ju sees the spirit and starts to chase after it and talk to it. Before she could get the spirit to let her help, she's kicked out of the building since she was there in disguise as a restaurant worker passing out coupons, and another restaurant employee from a competitor kicked her out and was like, "Stay off my turf." Meanwhile, Kang-bae is working at the grocery store, and we see him attempt to ask Yoo-rin to be his partner in the dance competition, which doesn't go very well, and she rejects the idea. After the failed attempt, his co-workers say it's because he wasn't confident enough and he needed to take charge, and they pretty much show him what they mean by acting out how he should approach Yoo-rin. By pinning her to a wall and telling her he's gonna be her partner at the count of 3, they also act out that they kiss as well, but as Kang-bae imagines doing this with Yoo-rin, he imagines a much different scenario if he does attempt this confident way of getting her to become his dance partner, so he decides not to go with this plan. Instead, he tries to talk with her again by finding her at a restaurant when they're both off work. As he tries to make a second attempt, a blind customer comes in with their seeing eye dog, and a customer who's already there starts to make a big stink about it, saying animals shouldn't be allowed in the restaurant and that the dog hair is getting in her food and everywhere else, which isn't true. In the scene, the dog is like right by the door and super far away. Like, it's just overall, this woman is being very insensitive. As the blind man gets up to leave so as not to cause any trouble, Kang-bae gets up and tells him to stay seated and enjoy his meal, and then tries to explain to the other patron about how, because it's a guide dog, it's allowed by law to enter the restaurant as well as other public places. The woman doesn't believe this and can't believe that such a stupid law exists and that animals shouldn't come first over people. I know it sounds ridiculous, but there are people like this out in the world. We obviously know this by now. This comment obviously upsets Yoo-rin, who ends up also getting involved, explaining that yes, humans do come first, and that a dog is helping a human in this manner because it's guiding this gentleman. How she should act like a human and treat others with respect. She then demands that the woman apologize to the blind patron, which she does, and that's kind of how they end that scene. This leads to Kang-bae and Yoo-rin walking together and learning more about one another, which you can see Yoo-rin is starting to understand Kang-bae a little more, and he might be growing on her a little bit. We later see her talking with her roommate about him, and she does have these little flashbacks of the most recent encounters when her roommate thinks that she might be interested in him, and she denies it. But you can tell he's growing on her for sure. Meanwhile, Woo-ju is tending to Manager Gui's wound that he got in the fight with the evil spirit, and after this, she decides she wants to eat meat instead of opening the bar, so they go out to eat. Which is a little confusing to Gui, because usually she's all about working him to death, but I think she feels a little bad for everything that's been going on with him and her. We then see the customer trying to get into his home, and he can't seem to remember the passcode. Luckily, his wife is there and she lets him in. At this point, I'm feeling very suspicious about the wife. I don't know what it is about this whole scene, but he comes up with the excuse that the reason he forgot his passcode is he must just be getting old. We then go back to what Manager Gui and Woo-ju are up to, and they are out eating. And this is when Woo-ju tells Gui about what happened at the customer's office and how she got so close to talking to the spirit and convincing it to let her help it. Kang-bae later joins them and tells them about how Yoo-rin said no to being his dance partner. They ask him how he asked her, and that's how they know why she said no. Since when he asked her, he made it all about him and how he needed her because she doesn't have feelings for him, and obviously his powers don't affect her. Manager Gui then explains that he shouldn't say it in a way that it's about him, but that it's about the other person and helping them or being with them. This causes Wooju to have a flashback to her time when she was alive and how the Crown Prince said something similar to her, since it seems the Crown Prince did fall in love with her and maybe her with him. But she tries to deny it or resist since she's lowborn and knows that it could never happen. But the Crown Prince doesn't seem to care about that very much. We come back to see Wooju spacing out at the restaurant thinking about this, and I can't tell if Manager Gui knew she would react that way or is just curious as to what she is thinking about. But after this, she's ready to head back to work when she comes out of her internal thoughts. Now, this is when the biggest and saddest plot twist occurs in the episode, and the thing that I didn't see coming. So we've been seeing moments of the customer missing his bus stop, forgetting his passcode to his home, and in the next scene we see that he has missed a very important meeting. Apparently they changed schedules, and it seemed that he replied to the email, but he doesn't remember doing any of it. So his boss calls him into his office and lets him know that he maybe should resign because apparently they're going to be doing restructuring and he knows that he's going to be on the list. And if he resigns now, he'll get half his annual salary. The boss also says that he's noticed that the customer's been forgetting more, has been acting very strange recently, and that a lot of his reports and everything that he'd been working on just were not making sense. This is when the customer asks if this can be changed and that he won't make any more mistakes in the future after some rest, because the whole reason that this has been happening is just because he's been tired, and to let him stay because he's finally saved up enough for his wife to go on a trip. When he says this about his wife, his boss kind of snaps a little, saying that they were letting things go since they thought he was still in shock from his wife's death, but that he needs to snap out of it. So this is when we find out that the spirit isn't his mother like they lead us to believe at the beginning of the episode, but it's his wife. And we start seeing him having these memory flashes of his wife in the hospital, and also that he has dementia. So with the stress of his wife's death, the dementia, he forgot that he had dementia kind of situation. He's been having these hallucinations, denial, that sort of thing. And what his boss said kind of snapped him back into reality, which is so horrible that I don't even know how that would feel, but that just sounds devastating. Now that this has been discovered, the spirit finally decides to reach out to Wooju and have her help her go into her husband's dream and say goodbye. And his big worry is, what if he forgets her? And she says, don't worry about that. When you come to the afterlife, I'll tell you everything about me. Like, they're gonna be together again, and he shouldn't worry about that. He should focus on dealing with his dementia and staying healthy and living, and that she'll see him soon. This was obviously a very emotional scene, and I definitely had to clean up my mascara before shooting this. So it was a lot. It was very sad and sweet. The two actors that played the married couple just did a great job. Like, I was emotionally invested in them and really felt like they loved each other. The next day at the grocery store, we see Yurin see a customer trying to steal liquor, and as she is detaining him at the customer service desk, it seems there's no liquor in the bag that she saw him put it in. This leads to them thinking she had made a mistake, a big mistake, but with the help of Kang-bae and his gift, the guy tells them how they run the scam and that he has a partner in crime who apparently was just waiting behind him by the customer service door with the liquor in his bag. When Yurin asks why he helped her, he says it's because she needed him. She needed someone to trust her at that moment, and the fact that she had trusted him before, he promised himself he would do the same for her if he ever could. This makes Yurin think differently about Kang-bae, and she ends up asking him to be her partner in the dance competition. We end the episode seeing the customer pack up to go to a retirement community, or retirement home, and stops one more time at the pop-up bar that's serving more dumplings. He eats some more dumplings that taste familiar to him, but he can't remember why. And then Manager Gui drives him to where he's headed, saying he's going in the same direction and would like the company. After he leaves, we see his wife and Death pop out from behind the bar, and apparently his wife had made those dumplings for her husband one last time. And now that she had said goodbye, heads to the afterlife with Death. Now, this isn't the last scene. In the last scene, we see a flashback of Wu Zhu when she was alive and the night that she leaves town. We see the crown prince waiting for her, and he has a ring that I think he plans to give her. And then a very mysterious, scary, yet hot-looking guy that is sort of in the scene as well. It seems Wu Zhu was supposed to meet the crown prince that night and instead leaves town without saying goodbye since her mother told her to. And that's how the episode ends. This episode, like the previous episodes, had some really funny, action-packed moments that I didn't expect, and honestly, some very sweet, emotional scenes, as well as a very thoughtful and important message in it as well. I was actually very shocked. I don't know why I didn't see it coming, that the spirit was the customer's wife and that he was suffering from dementia. I kind of felt like the dementia thing was going to be a thing, but for some reason I just didn't think it was his wife. I did feel like his wife was suspicious, but I thought in a more evil, sinister way. So it just turned out to be she loved him so much she didn't get to say goodbye, and that's why she was sort of sticking around. So my bad. So yeah, another really great episode in this series, and I know we're only on episode 5, but I am in love with Mystic Pop-Up Bar, and I highly recommend you start watching it if you're not already. It's sweet, funny, and it has really great positive messages about how we should all be treating each other as human beings, and those messages right now are so important. I'm getting more and more curious about the Crown Prince and what's going on there. And after this episode with how Wu Zhu kept looking sort of longingly at Manager Gui, I kind of feel like there's going to be a romance there and not with Kong Bei. I feel like Kong Bei is sort of the trainee kind of kid, and she's sort of in a mother role with him. So if they start doing a romance there, I feel like that's going to be a little weird. Maybe they'll still do it, but right now it seems like there's a Gui Wu Zhu romance brewing. Let me know if you were surprised by this twist in the episode, or if you saw it coming, and what you think is going to happen next. I'm getting more curious as to if the Crown Prince is going to be coming back soon as a spirit, or if he's already by her side. Is he the manager? Is he Kong Bei? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm obviously ending it here, and I'll see you next time. Bye. His Zhu tells Gui about what happened at the restaurant. I think it's barbecue. Is it barbecue? I think it's barbecue. I just spit all over the place.